I am not at all certain how this will go, but I'm going to give it a shot before I go to bed. There are so many things that I want to bring up eventually, not the least of which is who is Israel? What is Israel? What was the divorce? What was my divorce? There's just so many things that I want to talk about that I still haven't. And I don't even know where I'm going to go. This will just be a free-for-all. I remember back in the day when I was reading about in Ephesians 11, I believe, when the Bible was talking about we who are the first to believe in you Gentiles. And of course we get to Ephesians 2 where it talks about, for by grace are you saved. And then he makes it very clear. Therefore remember that you once Gentiles, who were once Gentiles, at that time were without Christ, aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers from the covenants of promise. And this was many years ago. But I was just looking at it like, I mean, I remember I was in the garage. My family was inside. And I knew that my wife wouldn't understand the things that I was understanding. But I digress about that. But I'm looking at it as far as you who were once far off have brought near by the blood of Christ. And Daniel talks about the same thing, I remembered, about those who were near and those who were far off, the Judeans, the house of Israel, the house of Judah. But anyway, it said, for he himself, our peace, who had made both one and broken down the wall of separation. And it wasn't long after that I started looking into the Sabbath and wrote a whole great big long paper about the Sabbath. And then I started to attempt to explain to my wife at the time about how I was getting so frustrated that she was so church-minded, is what I called it back then, as opposed to what I called kingdom mind. Being mindful of the kingdom. And at the time, I didn't fully understand Ezekiel 37, but even back then, my mind went back to Ezekiel 37. But again, I didn't fully understand it then until uh, I was building something in my backyard, and I found a guy online who was apparently and obviously a believer, a Christian, and I reached out to him. His name is and was Travis, and I reached out to him because I was under the impression that I was going to help him out. I was going to help him understand Christianity better. And as it turns out, he blew my mind with some information that for most people, and most people that he introduces this information to, it is a lot. For me, however, it was not so much. It was just the right amount, if you will. And so I called him and I asked him about his aquaponics, hydroponics setups and ideas and how he might be able to help me. And then, as we got off the phone, I thought I would stick it in there. Hey, by the way, you seem like a Christian, a believer, and why don't you tell me about that? And I proceeded to try to tell him my version of Christianity, if you will, or my understanding of Christianity. And we had a wonderful conversation. He wasn't pushy. He didn't try to push his ideas on me. It was just a wonderful conversation. And so we both agreed that we would converse again very soon. If I'm not mistaken, it was probably the next day. And I don't know if it was the very next day or a subsequent day that he actually threw it out there to introduce me to a video by Jim Staley that explained in 2.5 hours of detail how we are all Israel, exactly as specifically Romans 9, 10, and 11, but also the whole entire Bible is quite clear that we are all Israel. We were always supposed to be Israel and were called Israel, just like the Messiah also is called Israel, which is very confusing if you don't understand who's being spoken of at certain times in Scripture, but I digress. Uh, anyway, I'm getting sidetracked, of course. It's okay. It's so funny. Most times in the church, we think, "Oh, Israel. Israel is Judah. Judah is Israel." Most of us don't even understand that those two places, the house of Israel and the house of Judah, had both two different destinies and yet the same destiny. ultimately the same destiny. That's why God said to Hosea, I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, because he divorced the house of Israel. He never divorced Judah. Judah had the scepter. Judah is the people that kept the scripture, the Torah, the hope of the Messiah, and everything else there for us to be discovered. But you have these two different peoples with the two different destinies, and without understanding that, we cannot understand Scripture. We really can't. What they call two-house theology is imperative to understand the Bible. Otherwise, we end up thinking it is just Jews and Gentiles. But we have to understand that the new covenant, that wasn't a secret, it wasn't a mystery in the Old Testament. It was always prophesied that there would be a new covenant written on our hearts, not hearts of stone. We would be given hearts of flesh. It was always prophesied that there would be a new covenant and that the Messiah would come and enlist that new covenant, not only for the house of Israel, but through the house of Israel, all of the Gentiles would be saved. It was always prophesied. But we don't know that. And I didn't know that long ago either. So where did the house of Israel go? They became nothing, a generic. They went into the Gentiles. They went into the nations, the Goyim. Judah didn't know where they went. Judah has all kinds of thoughts about where they went. Some say they went into certain parts of the world. Some say they're deep hidden somewhere. Some say they'll never be found again. They're gone forever. There are all kinds of ideas about where the house of Israel went. But here's the truth. They went into